In this topic, we are identifying network device planes. So let's come back to this slide here in a moment and let's actually break down the three different device planes. So there's data plane, control plane, and management plane. And sometimes you might actually see some documentation refer to the control plane and the management plane as the same thing. One analogy too that a lot of folks in the field like to use is your control and management plane are almost like the brains, and then your data plane is kind of like the body or the legs moving. So the data plane is really what's used for getting your traffic or switching from one interface to another. A lot of times when we look at our ASICs, those application-specific integrated controllers, they are geared more towards the data plane. And also, if you're familiar with concepts like Ceph, sometimes we'll see that we have a dedicated table that is almost like a broken down brief version of the routing table that we can use to make forwarding decisions in the data plane. Now, let's put that on the back burner for the moment, and then let's also talk about control plane. So control plane and management plane both utilize your CPU. So when we think about the dynamic routing protocols, or anytime we need to make a reconvergence with something like spanning tree, we need the CPU to do that for us. So when we think about control plane, think about CPU, think about our dynamic routing protocols and the algorithms that are used to build structure that's required for the traffic forwarding. And then the management plane is just what it sounds like, all of the management traffic. So when we think about SNMP or syslog and just we as administrators logging into the device, SSHing, or even just consoling in, those are concepts of management plane. So just kind of going back, some of the areas that we'll sort of focus in on as far as coming up with a baseline for security is looking at, first of all, the infrastructure of the device and making sure that we harden that infrastructure, making sure that any type of routing infrastructure, what is our normal traffic, and how can we maybe implement things like authentication on our dynamic routing protocols, making sure that we have device resiliency. We'll talk about some of the different ways that we can use telemetry to bring all of the data about the health of our environment and what's normal and what types of prediction we can do. And then, of course, we have policy enforcement and some functions and features that we can implement on our switching infrastructure as well. So we'll kind of get into some of these topics in more detail in this section and also in the next section. All right, and here are maybe some examples too of how security controls can be deployed throughout our infrastructure. So whether we are looking at hardening things like control plane and management plane in the internet edge, obviously we'll also want to try to do as much of this stuff everywhere as we possibly can, the WAN, the campus LAN, our data center fabric. And of course, if there are scenarios or situations where it's not possible for some reason to implement this everywhere, we generally want to focus in on the areas that are exposed the most. So let's focus in on those areas first. And then if we need to drill down further, of course, we can do that.